Do you fish? No. You know, people who don't fish think that fishing is lazy or boring, but it is the complete opposite. There are 100 little decisions to be made, variables to be considered, and you're never quite sure what made the difference. Did I cast too high, too far to the left? Did I reel it in too slow or too fast? Is the lure too shiny or too dull? Do I stay here or should I go over there? And you know it's not luck, but you do not know by how much. Because I am never disappointed out here, because I don't expect anything, because anything is possible. I can be hopeful out here, even in failure. Because I know if I just go out there around that tree, it might be different. Something might be different. Something I do might make a difference.
Just gonna send it.
Fluorocarbon I will use, but I have an extremely sensitive rod.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
That's what she said.
Yeah.
On my property, you didn't win in my yard.
Wait.
All of you.
Daddy, chill.
What the hell is even that?
You're listening to Fishing the DMV with your hosts, Thomas Ahrens and Jared Mounts. Fishing the DMV is brought to you by Jake's Bait and Tackle, located in Winchester, Virginia.
If that doesn't get you jacked up, I don't know what will.
Good morning, everybody. Happy 4th of July. I'm sorry, it took me a little long there. Had to get some stuff set up. My wife was having some computer issues with signing into the old YouTube. It is just me today, but I was feeling like we needed somebody else before we got into today, so I got a little setup here. Joining us for the first time is the JoJo Cam. This is my fishing partner for bank fishing. Sadly, he is not a boat dog. He is terrified of being on water or floating docks. But when I do any bank fishing adventure or I scope out new places to go, the JoJo comes with me. So I thought I would just give him a debut premiere today as we kind of get into today's program. Please let me know right now, thumbs up, thumbs down. How is the audio level before I start? If you're new here to these live streams, everybody, before I start talking, I just want to make sure that my audio levels sound pretty good before I go down to the rabbit hole. Let's see. Happy 4th. David Smith, happy 4th. Happy 4th, bud. Good morning. Good morning, bud. So how do my audio levels sound right now? Let's see, I do not like the way. There we go. Yeah, there's something. I think my camera's dying, so it keeps. I had my wife recording with it, and now it fluctuates. Its aperture, and I think she put it on automatic somehow. But we'll figure that out later. Okay, audio's good. Audio's good. Sweet. All right. So today, I have been working on a Hidden Gems episode. If you guys are not familiar with the Hidden Gems segment, I really wanted to try to create a series that was more of like a documentary / homage to Fishing on the B side, which is a really little fun YouTube series that was done by Joe Cimelli, and I think it was on the Meat Eaters show. So I wanted to combine that with a documentary series on just hidden places that you can go fishing around here. And so I've always wanted to do one in Sleeters Lake. When this kayak tournament happened, I felt like it was a good platform to allow that to take place, and I've been working on that episode. I'm really hoping it drops this week, but it might have to be next week, depending. I'm doing the coloring right now, and I'm finishing the script and some editing with that thing. But with that said, that right there, the Hidden Gems is a little popcorn. It's an appetizer. It's an hors d'oeuvre. It's to really play with the YouTube algorithm to go viral. It gives you a little snippet of what this place is like. And there was a lot of information when I was editing and writing my script. Like, there's so much stuff I want to talk about this lake, but I can't make the video 3 hours long. It's got to be tight. So I'm going to do this live stream now on the 4th of July to talk about Sleeters Lake. And then when Hidden Gems drops, this will be in the episode description. So this will play next. That way it can be more of an in-depth look about the lake. But this won't just be about Sleeters Lake in Round Hill, Virginia. Do not worry about that. I will also talk about anything else you guys want to talk about today on the 4th of July. Is anyone going fishing? What's going on? So wait, let me get my trusty map up here. And if there's any particular questions that you guys have. All right. So Sleeters Lake, Virginia. Let me get my map up here. Headed back from Washington now. Okay, cool. All right. So Joe, oh, wow, he moved. Let's play a drinking game every time the dog moves, because I don't think it's going to be very much. All right. Let me get the old presenting screen up here. So we're going to go with a little background on the place. All right. There it is. So Sleeters Lake is located in Round Hill, Virginia. It was owned by Colonel Slaters back in the 60s. It was for the apple orchards. There used to be a ton of apple orchards. There used to be a big farm, and this lake was used for irrigation. It's about 100-ish acres. And for the longest time, it was completely, I would say, closed off to the public. And it was nothing but orchards, trees, bald eagles, wildlife. It was the most scenic place you could believe. It was absolutely beautiful. And you would be asking, like, well, did you just do a lot of history read up on this? Like, how do you know all this information about it? Is it just because you're researching the Hidden Gems episode, which is a great answer? No. I used to live here, believe it or not. Believe it or not, I used to live in Round Hill, Virginia for the longest time. I grew up in Vienna until I was about 14 years old. And then we moved out to Round Hill, hoping to eventually buy a farm somewhere. And my parents did out in Percival. And so we had the Sleeters Lake right there. And we used to take a Dick's Sporting Goods canoe underneath the 7 overpass and get into the lake that way. And then eventually we got a bass raider. We did that. Then we figured out through the Round Hill Underground that there was a lady that owned land on Sleeters Lake, and she had a boat ramp. And when I heard about this, when I heard that there was a boat ramp, we had to start the mission to find this lady. Her name was Mrs. Barker, and she owned a boat ramp that was right there off of 7. And we'll go back to the map now. Boom. So right through here where 7 is, and 719. And 719 or New Cut Road goes all the way to Tammy's Diner in Round Hill. Well, back in the day when I was a wee lad, Mrs. Barker owned the house here on this side of 7, and she owned this area right here. And in return for driving all this massive highway through her property, she was allotted a boat ramp. So we had that boat ramp right there that we used, and once we gained permission. And that really started my love and my passion. I had a passion for fishing, but I didn't have a home lake. And, we talk about all this time on the show where you really, really, really need a home body of water if you want to go somewhere in this sport. It's hard to be a professional angler or get really advantageous into angling if you don't have a place that you can go consistently. If you live in the middle of a city and you don't have access to water, you maybe do it on a vacation or whatever, but it's going to be hard for you to get into tournament fishing. And so Sleeters Lake really was that place for me. Jojo, do you have anything to add to that? No, he doesn't. I think Jojo, you sure? He's very deep in his thinking and his standpoints right now. Again, take a shot every time that dog moves. He usually doesn't breathe or move. He just kind of hibernates. So let me know if he moves. So anyway, through here, we were able to get, we got a tracker. It was made in like the 1970s, little old beat up boat. But that was back in 2015. No, I'm 15. Wow. 2005, 2006 is kind of when we got access to Sleeters Lake. And back then, this whole thing, there was no houses at all. Absolutely none. There was none of this, the pavement, the houses, the buildup, none of that. It was pristine and absolutely beautiful. And that was the homeowners association. Round Hill already bought the lake, but they haven't developed it yet. Now the lake is almost looks like Manassas or Ashburn, where it's just completely junked with a ton of buildings completely around it. And once Mrs. Barker passed away, they shut down that boat ramp completely. No boats are allowed on that lake, but they did at Sleeters Lake State Park. They allow kayak rental and things of that ilk. So yeah, it's a little weird for me where you go from a lake that was really this beautiful oasis where you could put a boat on, and there's only like 10 people that could fish that place, to basically it's run by the homeowners association in Round Hill. I mean, it is what it is. It's you can't stop progress. I'm just glad, I guess, in one sense that they allowed somebody to fish it and be on it, because usually homeowners associations like to turn lakes into private places like Lake Holiday, which is a shit show up there, or Lake Manassas or Beaver Dam Reservoir, where they basically shut access that. Oh no, he's moving. The dog is moving. And he's down. I guess he does not like the camera. Well, Jojo, thank you so much for your service here. I really appreciated you being on the show. But we'll let you go there since you are going to lick a metal. Okay. So while he's licking a metal pipe, thank you for your service today. I appreciate it. So we're going to go back I guess it's just going to be me and you guys now, since he doesn't like the camera. So anyway, it could be like Beaver Dam Reservoir. It could be like Lake Manassas. It could be like Lake Holiday, where the homeowner station just buys the damn lake and then just completely shuts it off from the public. But they didn't do that. So I guess that's a win. With that said, we now have this lake. right there, this hidden jewel that now is technically open to the public. What makes this lake so fantastic, and you might be saying, well, Tom, what do you mean it's so fantastic? It's 100 acres. If you put 10 kayaks on that bad boy, it easily gets overwhelmed with how much boat traffic there is. It doesn't take much. It's the vegetation. The reason this lake can produce so many fish, the reason this lake can outcompete Lake Frederick, it was able during the Northern Virginia Kayak Tournament Association. It had the second most fish catches of all 5 lakes. And for that tournament, you got to pick 5 lakes. You got to pick Lake Frederick, Burke Lake, Georgetown, Occoquan, or Sleeters. It was number 2 in fish catches, and it's nowhere near the size. And it's because of the SAV, the subaquatic vegetation. For all my new listeners who don't understand, subaquatic vegetation or grass is not a weed. It is a living organism that is needed for lakes, bodies of water, estuaries, the ocean, to have a healthy ecosystem. And what it does is it gives more living surface area to a body of water. So let's just say you took an area, just a big round bowl, and it's completely featureless, it's completely flat. If you take that bowl and you put vegetation in it, all of a sudden, that whole bowl has livable area for those fish. Bait can hide in it. Minnows can hide in it. Fish can spawn in it. They can hide from predators. It gives them more area to live, which means if there's more area to live, you can have a higher biomass of aquatic wildlife. If you take away the aquatic vegetation, you decrease the living space. You take away their homes. And so you go from a massive, almost like if you want to look at Round Hill as an example, you're going to take away all these massive developments and you're going to take it away and you're just going to have 2 or 3 homes. And when you take away all that vegetation, all of a sudden, all you're left with is whatever stumps are there, whatever trees that are allowed to lay into the water. Or what so many people love to do is like, we'll just throw Christmas tree reefs and tire reefs and we'll call it a day. But you're shrinking the habitable area for these fish to live in. Right now, there's still a thriving subaquatic vegetation in this lake. I hear rumors that Round Hill is going to dump pesticides and grass carp into that lake. And if that happens, this place will be dead. And I really hope that's not the case, because I think it's a crime against humanity when homeowners associations just dump pesticides and grass carp into a thriving ecosystem because they want it to look like a swimming pool. But that's a fight for another day. Anyway, that's why this lake is so freaking good and has so many bass in it. Now, the next question would be, or the next thing that really comes to mind when you're fishing this place, and I'll go to a bigger map, or just to my face here, is I suck at this lake. I can't catch them. Why can't I catch them? It's so hard. There's grass. It's stringy. When you're fishing any kind of body of water that has subaquatic vegetation, and it's a lake, Florida, Champlain, Sleeters, that there's no tide. A tide, like a Potomac River, James River, gives those fish distinct windows that they will feed in. They're still going to be in specific areas and all that. We'll get into that. But you've dialed it down to like you're going to have 2 hours that they're going to be really eating. On a lake, you don't have that. You really don't have that specific time frame you can dial into. There's a morning bite, of course, but then each lake has its ebbs and flows when they're going to bite. So let's add that to the equation. Number 2 is, with all that vegetation, with all that area that they can live, there are certain key spots in the grass that those fish will congregate. It is no different than if you had side imaging and you were on Kentucky Lake and you were looking through all of those ledges and you find this one little rock clump that stacks them all in there. The same thing happens with subaquatic vegetation. There's little key spots in it. And if you have electronics, you can find it. If you don't, the only way you can find it is to fish, and you fish through areas. But what gives you the reward is when you catch one, there's a reason you caught one there in the grass. And usually there'll be 2 or 3, or it'll refill. In the tournament, where I was fishing, and we'll get into that too, there was this key area where there was a different type of grass. I think it was milfoil. There was a stringy type of grass in the lake right now, which I'm not used to. That's the primary grass. And then there's a little bit of milfoil. And I found a couple strands of it. And every time I would pass through that area, I would catch one. Literally every time, just like clockwork. And so when you're fishing grass lakes, number one is you have to continually move and cover water. And you can do that two ways. You can do that with a moving bait. Everyone knows of a few. I will give you my few examples here that work for me. And then you can use a flipping and pitching method, and you can actually go into the grass, flip it with a Texas rig, whichever one's your favorite, and you just go down the line. So now let's talk about the three distinct areas of grass. I think this is important too. Let me see if I can find some on the old Google Earth now, because I might have to go to a different body of water that has a little bit more distinct of an edge. Actually, that's pretty good. You know what? Let's do Google Earth. And guys, if you have any questions for me, please let me know in the comment section down below so I can get them answered. So I'm really hoping that Google Earth has a little bit better tightness to it. See, Dave Smith, my nephew Luke and Noah fish Sleeters all the time. It's a really good lake. I'm really praying that it stays like that. And I'm going to use a place that has way more pronounced subaquatic vegetation just for an example. We're going to go with good old Occoquan here because like I can find some grass beds real quick. Perfect. All right. So you see right here, right where that sparklingness is, that right there is an inside weed edge. Okay. On every grass lake, you're going to have a inside, an outside, and then the main thickness clump of your grass line. So the inside edge is going to be the edge that is closest to shore. And as you can see between these two docks where you don't have that shine, that would be the inside weed edge. It's going to be right up against the bank, and there's going to be a trough or an opening right there where those fish are going to be able to sit. Usually that area is really good in the morning and will allow you a good topwater bite. That edge usually gets beat up pretty decently, I think. Everyone wants to fish the bank and beat the bank. So you have the inside edge. Not going to talk about that much. It's really good in the evening and the early morning time. The next part of it is going to be your main thickness of the grass. Okay. Now, when you're fishing the thick stuff on a tidal body of water, that grass on low tide will become a mat. It'll be thick. And then you can use a frog, a fluke, or usually what you have to do is you have to punch into it with a Texas rig, usually a 7.5 foot setup, 30 to 80 pound braid, and you're just trying to cover water and try to get to it. In lakes like Lake Champlain, Deep Creek Reservoir, and Sleeters, the grass doesn't always come up to the surface. In some places it does, but there's a lot of holes and pockets and dips. So something like that, you have a few more options. The Cinco is a fantastic bait. A trick worm, just a plain Texas rig trick worm, is fantastic as well. A fluke is fantastic. A Zoom speed worm is deadly. It caught two or three fish for me. One that was a legit keeper in the tournament. Pumpkin seed color is really good on a very lightweight, and you slowly reel it through there. That's good. You can hit the pockets as well, the holes in the vegetation. Then you have the last piece, and this is where I think this is what's super important here, is the outside edge. Because grass blesses a fishery with an abundance of living space, it creates areas fish will hold that without grass, it would never exist. And so if grass is allowed to permeate and grow out to, let's say, 8, 10, 12 feet, those fish will hang on those clumps that are just scattered outside on that edge. or they will be on the defined outer edge, and they will be right up against it. They'll be right on top of it, or they'll be out about 3 to 4 feet suspended. Those fish are really usually uncatchable unless you have like live scope and you can pinpoint them. What bothers people about this is a lot of the bigger bass will get out there on those outside clumps and they'll just float there and they'll suspend. When you have live scope, you have the ability to catch them a little bit easier, especially in shad lakes, herring lakes, things of that ilk, because they want that faster retrieve and they're looking up. With a grassy lake, though, the forage species is not always shad or blueback. Okay. Sleeters Lake is still predominantly, at this point in time, it is a bluegill lake, a true bluegill lake. A lake like that would be like Lake Champlain or Deep Creek. Both of those places have a perch population, but it's still more of that panfish brim type bite. And with that said, you need to be able to match the hatch. And to match that hatch, that means looking like a bluegill. And that gets into the bait that really helped me out here, which was a swim jig. Okay. And I mentioned this in the Hidden Gems video. It's called this, I call it the Sleeters Lake Special. And what this is a Dirty Jigs finesse swim jig. I use 2 sizes. I use a 1/4, and I think it's a 5/6 or a 5/8. But it's the lighter version. It's under 3/8. And then you pair it with the Rage Crawl, and this is the bluegill color. Now, the important thing is with this is you're going to dye the tips of the tail, because bluegill on many fisheries have a distinct blue to chartreuse hue. And I think in these clear grassy lakes, people think it has to be supernatural. That is true unless you are matching a bluegill. And when you're matching a bluegill, and as you can tell by the little these bluegill right here, and this is actually at Sleeters Lake. Look at the hue of their tail. To match a bluegill, you have to add a little bit of chartreuse to the tip. It's needed. Without it, it does not look like a bluegill at all. Spike it dye, spike it Sharpie. Either one works extremely well. Go grab yourself a bottle of that and make sure you dye the tip of your Senko, your speed worm, or your swim jig with just a little bit of dye. So that's number 1 to be able to match a bluegill. Number 2, the way bluegill behave, in my opinion, they behave completely different than a shad or a blueback when it comes to the way they move and interact in general. A shad or a blueback are always moving. They're pelagic species. They have to continue to move. And so you see that reflected in how you fish it. If you're fishing a white swim bait or a spinner bait, a jerk bait, something of that ilk, you're constantly moving that thing, banging it into cover, acting like a complete lunatic. Because that's how shad behave. That's how shad act. That's how blueback act. And bass that are specifically feeding for them, that's how they target. It's that faster moving, that reaction bite. And I think a lot of times us fishermen, because of Bassmaster and things like that, that just habitually talk about these things, we think that's the only way we fish. And so we go to a place like a Sleeters Lake, or you go down to Florida, and what you end up doing is you're constantly fishing as fast as humanly possible, because that's how we're taught. If you watch bluegill, though, and how specifically bluegill interact, they're not always moving. Bluegill can pause. They can hover. They can almost float. They stop. They turn sharply. They suspend and almost pause, and then their fins will come up and they'll flare their gills and their pectoral fins. They act completely differently than any other bait species. Now, granted, every now and then they will spook, they will freeze, especially when they're on beds. But besides that one circumstance when they're on the beds, bluegill are very slow moving. And when you fish a speed worm, or the way I fish a finesse swim jig, is I will get out there on the edge of the grass on whatever edge I find. I'm going to fire that thing out there, and then I'm going to hold the rod tip up, and I'm going to let that thing pendulum, and I'm barely going to move it. I'm going to let that thing pendulum all the way down to the bottom. Then once it hits bottom, I'm going to engage the reel, and I'm going to slowly turn it. I'm talking you're going to fish that speed worm, which you can use, or a finesse swim jig, and you are going to move that thing as painfully slow as possible. You want that thing not to bang into the vegetation to create a reaction strike. You want that thing to almost deflect off the vegetation. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, it comes down to the efficiency. If you take a half-ounce swim jig, or let's say a chatterbait's a great example, and you smash that thing into grass, depending on the grass you're fishing, it'll get bungled up. It's going to wedge itself in there, and then you're going to have to rip it out, and you're going to tear clumps. And when you tear it out, sometimes what will happen is you're ripping it like 60 feet. And I'm exaggerating, but you'll rip it 60 feet away. And that sometimes will get a reaction out of the fish. Other times I feel like it will spook them, and you're going to miss a lot of bites. And then you're also spending the whole time dealing with a gummed up bait. When you're dealing with thick, deep grass, you will spend a lot of time with that gummed up on your hook if you're trying to just auger it in there and rip it out. And so that's why I go with a 1/4 or 5/6 finesse swim jig. I want that thing light enough, or I want that thing heavy enough that it can get down to where the grass is, but it's light enough that when I let it pendulum into the vegetation, it's not going to auger in. I'll be able to feel it, and I'll be able to lift it through gently. Because what I'm basically treating this thing like is like a shaky head when I fish a finesse swim jig. Like I'm literally trying, or a spy bait, I'm trying to sneak it through as stealthily as possible. And the way I picture this thing this is like a bluegill that's slowly trying to sneak through the bass's lair. It's not trying to spook it. It's not trying to dart away, which would create a reaction strike. If you ever watch a deer in the wild, this will happen too. They won't always spook. They'll freeze first. They'll go slow. I'll just let that thing go through there. And what will happen a lot of times is that bass is going to shark it. That bass is going to see the dyed tips of the tail, which is what the key in on bluegill is, that color change on the back of their tail. And they're going to shark that bait for a while. And because that bait is so light, when you pull it through, or you feel grass and you hold your rod tip up in the air, when it pops through and that rod tip is up, that bait will just slowly pendulum down into the hole. And that fish will come up from behind it and then inhale it. That's a lot of those bites. And if you watch, the Hidden Gems episode that's going to be dropping 5/16. Thank you, bud. Yeah, I'm terrible with numbers. It's 5/16. Thank you. What'll happen is as you're fishing it through that thicker grass, you'll feel the clump. But if you match the weight light enough, you'll feel it. You just hold your rod tip up a little bit and you just gently pull it out. Because if you do that, think of a clump. Let's say this hole right here is a clump, and you have grass that is, let me try to do this. I'm going to do it like this way. Let's say the grass is folded over a little bit. You see this hole in between my hands? That's going to be the hole in the grass. Well, if you come by with this swim jig and you hit this and you yank it 6 feet, you're not going to be able to get it into this hole that's on the other side of this clump. If that thing is just light enough and it hits and you can slowly lift it up, you'll be able to drop it in between the clumps. That's when this finesse swim jig setup is super deadly. When it's light enough that you're not going to bury it in there, but you can feel it and you can pull it up and over and then let it drop through the hole and keep fishing it and drop through the hole. And those fish will they'll come back through it. And it's like a swim bait bite a lot of times, where you just feel a tick and that thing's in the back of their throat, and you can wail on them. So my setup for this, during the kayak tournament, I had 2 swim jigs tied on. I had a 5/16 and I had a 1/4. The 1/4 was on 12-pound test. The 5/16 was on, I think it was 14 or 15-pound Sunline fluorocarbon. And both of them were on a medium rod, a medium heavy, extra fast 7-foot Phoenix rod. That's the brand I like. You can use whatever brands you want. Going with that lighter line allows it to get its depth, even though it's a little bit lighter. and I have insane casting distance. Okay. That's absolutely important. Matching the weight is the most, I think, crucial part of this whole setup. It has to be light enough that it feels like a pain in the butt to get it down there. So that way, when you hit the grass, it does not snag. And I know I said that about 30 times, but that's just, it's so crucial for this thing to work. The other thing it's got to work is you got to understand that when these fish hit the bait, they're going to hit it two ways. First way, we all love it. It's the line goes slack and you can wail on them. The second way that they hit it a lot of times, and this happens with a swimming worm too, and a swim jig, or a swimming worm, and it'll happen with a swim jig, because you are matching those tails right there to a bluegill. And again, I'll just show this video for the people that are just tuning in. You can see the color of that tail. Because you're matching that, those fish are keying in on the tail. They're going to bite the tails first, and you're going to feel the tick. Or the first tick you'll feel is them biting and their nose hitting the back of the hook. I really think that's what happens is they come and they grab the back fins to immobilize the bluegill. And that first tick you feel is them hitting with their snout the back of the hook. And that's why when you set it, the claws get ripped off. What I've learned, and this takes a shit ton of patience, is when you feel the tick, pull the rod up a little bit and see if there's any weight there. Because what will happen sometimes is they'll tick it and they'll hold it for a split second and then they'll take the rest of it. If you yank immediately, you're just going to lose your whole trailer. So as you're fishing that thing and you feel a tick, pull up a little bit on it. If it's still slack, he's got the whole bait. Because usually, again, I don't think I've ever had one come up from here or the front. They're sharking the whole thing. And so what happens is they push it forward. If they take the whole jig, a lot of the times it's going to go slack. You're good to go. If you feel a tick and there's still a little tension there, or there's nothing at all, but your line hasn't gone slack, keep reeling it or give it a little shake. Usually that little shake helps a lot. So I hope that really helps. I want to make sure I get everybody's questions in before I keep talking like an absolute lunatic here. Oh, let me go back to some questions. Audio is good. Awesome. Sounds good. Yeah, Jojo. Yeah, Jojo Cam will come back, but Jojo decided to leave the screen. David Smith, my nephew Luke and Noah fish Sleeters all the time. It's a fantastic lake. It's my happy place. Age fishing, the lake. That lake is the juice. It really is. It's a beautiful lake. And I just wish there were more lakes like that around our area. And I wish people would start seeing like how hard is it to build a couple of 100-acre lakes. Sleeters Lake is 100 acres. And if you husband it right, if you protect it right, it can be an outstanding fishery. Imagine if we had 3 or 4 Sleeters Lakes in Northern Virginia. It's 100 acres. We could do it. There's enough space for it, especially in Western Loudoun. 3 or 4 years, 5 to 10 years ago, there was enough space, 100%. But no one will do it. No one wants to build a lake, but if there's a lake available, people will go in, buy the whole thing out, throw a lock and chain around it, say it's private, get the hell out. They'll do that, but they won't build one. We need more lake building. We need more recreational opportunities. And it's just a shame that we're getting to this point where people, homeowners associations, private and realtor developers will buy all these places that we used to enjoy as kids and then say no one's allowed in. So it is really a shame. I love Sleeters. Yeah, Sleeters is a place. It's beautiful. I have fished that place for... I fished that place for since I was 13 or 14 is really where I learned. I think the thumbnail of this is one of the best days I've had. The best day I've ever had there. My first 22-pound bag came out of Sleeters when I was a kid. I would like to see some smallmouth lakes here. Yeah, you could do it. Like there was a plan to dam up Goose Creek. I think it was like 50 years ago to dam up Goose Creek and actually put a bigger. There's already a dam on Goose Creek, but to actually put a massive reservoir in. But the reservoir would have been so big that it would have backed up to Middleburg. And Middleburg, being all the money that it has and all the lawyers that it has, shut that down. So, but yeah, I mean, think about that. Goose Creek would have been dammed, and we would have had a couple 1,000-acre reservoir back 50 years ago. But people shut it down because local governments are complete idiots and don't know shit about anything. 516,000, yeah. Travis Seiberg. The first two places I truly learned how to fish underwater vegetation was the Potomac and Lake Sleeters. Yeah, the underwater vegetation is just so important. And I know I harp on a lot on this channel, but I think it's just trying to educate the public. And it's not the outdoorsman, if that makes sense. And I think that's what's hard here is I have an outdoor show, and so I'm preaching to the people that understand it. But it's not trying to fight homeowners associations or people that are not in the know, but it's to educate them that when you dump pesticide or you dump grass carp into a lake, you're hurting the ecosystem. You know, it's nature. If you buy a house in the national forest and you start complaining that there's too many trees and you can't see things, why'd you buy a house in the national forest? You know, if you buy a property on a lake, it's a lake. It's nature. It's not a swimming pool. And one thing I hear a lot of people in the higher ups in certain government agencies is like, well, they want to keep it with an aesthetic look. And it's like, but it's nature. It's the aesthetic is it's wild. But I think if we slowly over time educate people like, no, like this is actually killing the ecosystem. You know, the same people that want to drive Teslas and are afraid of sea turtles being killed by plastic straws are also the same ones that want to dump pesticides into a lake and put grass carp in it, kill all the vegetation and turn it into a private swimming pool. Those are the same people. And I think if we slowly educate them over time, you know, we can change people's mindsets and we can get grass back and we can start building lakes again, which I really think building lakes is going to be kind of something that we need to do here. Tangent over about that. Sorry, I go down a rabbit hole with all that. I got some questions here on the old Instagram. Let's see. And then guys, yeah. Any questions you want to let me know so I can get those answered before I shut off here. So anyway, Sleeters Lake, getting back to Sleeters Lake. Key with Sleeters Lake, honestly, is finding those outside grass edges, that deeper stuff, and fishing painfully slow. A swim bait, a finesse swim jig, what I like. A rattle trap or a crankbait will work. Usually early springtime at Sleeters, a yellow crankbait is banging, especially hitting that vegetation, looking for that green stuff. And also figuring out where the boats go. So in that tournament, what gave me success, besides that I've been fishing it since I was like 3 years old, is I would look to see where the boats would go and when places breathed. So there's everyone knows about the hump out in the middle, but I'll show you guys that on the map. And I'll show you where I caught the big ones. Move that right there. Oh, it's like, and side note, for you guys that don't know this, Google Earth absolutely kills your streaming capability. Don't know if you guys know that, but I'm going to shut down my Google Earth app because it just murders my Wi-Fi. All right, cool. All right. So Sleeters Lake, right out here in the middle. If you launch from the state park, they need to update this a little bit, but there's a state park that cuts right through here. If you come down to here, right here in the main stem, there's a massive hump that's right out here. It's a big jutting point. You can fish that thing until the cows come home. And so let's say there's like 6 or 7 people on here. Usually what happens when people fish is they're like lemmings. One kayak or John boat is set up here, and then 6 or 7 more follow. And eventually they all congregate. It's a weird human nature that eventually they all congregate. I'm not saying for better or worse. I'm just saying like it is what it is. They all congregate. So what I would do, I wasn't the first kayak in the morning, but I knew I really wanted to check out that hump. Me going over to that hump without knowing the juice for the day, where they're going to set up that day, would have been absolutely a folly. All those boats, all those lures banging in there, the fish are already going to be a little bit uneasy with all that pressure over top their head. And I didn't know where the juice was. So therefore, I'm just wasting time. So because of that, I would go to another stretch. The first stretch I went to where I lost an absolute freaking giant when I was just paddling around. If you come up here, you had a really defined edge from this pocket here all the way down to right about here, where you had beautiful grass drutting down to a deep edge. No one was on it, which gave me the opportunity to fish it correctly. So that's number one. Find places that no one's on, or find areas within the areas that no one's fishing. And that's going to get to where I caught my big ones. So with that said, here, I get over here and I start paddling around and I see something that's very interesting. The grass is bent over because of the wind current. The wind was blowing hard from 7 all the way down to the dam, and the grass was pulled over a little bit. So I knew immediately, because of that, I'm going to have to adjust the way I was fishing, because I was fishing down towards the dam. I stopped what I was doing and I repositioned my kayak and started fishing up. Because when you're fishing a jig or anything else like that, if that grass is bent over even a little bit, even if it's not breezy out, that tells you there's some type of current. There's some type of current. And those fish are going to set up with their nose facing into the grass that's bent over. It gives them shade. It gives them an ambush point. And if you fish, and I think this is what hurts a lot of people that grass fishing correctly, if you take your crankbait and you cast it out there and you're going the opposite way and you're bringing that bait towards the grass that's bent over like this, yeah, it's going to be miserable. But if you flip it around and you fish, we were casting upstream and bringing it back with the grass bent over, way easier. So I had a really nice one that just, it literally, I think as soon as it hit the water, it swallowed the bait and started swimming towards me. Because no matter how hard I cranked on the reel handle, I didn't catch up to him. That was a nice one. Come back here and I fish through this point here. I catch, I think 7 on the day off this hump. I couldn't even put all the fish catches in the hidden gem video that's going to drop this week. I just couldn't. But I put all those fish came right from here, from a certain area. The area, and again, like, oh, where's the area? It was a little bit of, I think it was milfoil. There was a stringy grass and I was fishing through, and all of a sudden I caught one. Made note of that. Fish around the hump a little bit more, caught nothing. In grass lakes, you have got to refish areas. So I went and I did a big old circle. Went back to the hump, same angle, caught another one. But this time he came up with some grass and it was bright green with strands. It wasn't stringy. And then I knew, okay, that's what they're on, is just a little bit of grass that's right there. There's probably other patches there that I just didn't find. Once I found that, I tried to fish it some more, but I fished from different angles and caught nothing. Made the same wraparound that day, caught another one. And so I found the casting angle and the piece. And at that point, if other people wanted to come over and fish the area, they could, because I knew how the juice was set up and I knew the angle for that day. And I think a lot of it also had to do with the wind. The wind was blowing a certain way. It was light wind, but it was enough to create a ripple. And I think that forced the fish to hug a certain way to the bank. So then I make a move and I move all the way up to 7. And this is where, for you old school guys, 7 is where Mrs. Barker is, right up here. Barker's right through here. You got 7 right through here. This right here, which is a huge mat of vegetation, is beautiful. Really wish I had more time for a frog. As I turn the lip right through here, I notice that there is like a trillion kayaks and john boats up here. And it is beautiful. It's lush green vegetation. It's not just the stringy stuff. There's some other type in there. And chat, you can help me out if it's like milfoil or something. I thought it was milfoil, but I could be wrong. Maybe I don't know, some sort of cabbage. It's native. I think it's native. But everybody was fishing all the way back through here. They were fishing as tight to the bank as possible. And they left open this area through here. Now, here's the juice. Sleeters Lake has deep grass lines. Like you have a Deep Creek Lake, Lake Champlain. From about, I'm going to say here to this point across, there can sometimes be a deep grass edge there. But you can use that as kind of like a marker for yourself. Okay, there's a deep grass edge that will come out to about here. And then you'll have a old creek channel right through here, and you have an old creek channel right through here. What I did is I set up on the deep edge fire the swim jig out, hold the rod tip, and just let it pendulum down until it hits something, and then slowly crank it back. And I started to catch my bigger ones. And then you'll see this in the video. I was fishing that thing through there, and I was pretty far off. I kept getting gummed up as I moved through this place. And I was throwing the 5/16 at this time. I switch up, I go to my 1/4. And what I'm assuming is, I don't know if it's the grass is taller here, if I'm just getting a little bit more shallower. I launch this thing out. I let it pendulum through a grass clump. It goes solid. I swing back on it. And all of a sudden, it's like slamming it into a brick wall. This is the big one. And it gums me up in the grass. It completely balls me up and it's underneath the water. It's pretty bad. And it turns out to be the 19-incher. Absolutely smoked it. And again, it was like I was just holding the rod. I popped it through some vegetation, or I lifted it through some vegetation, and I let it swim down. And it just was the hardest thunk of my life. And it was that bad boy there. Even though there was other boats around, what I did is I looked at where they were sitting. And since all of them were in the back and on the sides, when you have that much boat pressure, unless you know a specific piece of grass that's the juice, all those bass will push away from you and reset up somewhere else. So if there's 50 boats on the shallower edge of the vegetation, what will end up happening is that pressure will push them out to the deeper stuff. So just keep that in mind when you're fishing grass vegetation. Is number one, a grass bed will hold way more fish than a cove that has none. And so that's, again, why this lake is so awesome and can have so many boat pressure. Number two is, if they feel like they're being pressured by too many boats, just move to another part of the grass bed where they're not, where it hasn't been chopped up. And that could be like 20 feet. That's all it takes for these grass bed fish, because they're not going to leave the grass. It's their home. And it's way different than like a dock. If you just have one dock or two docks in the back of a cove and there's 5 boats on it, those fish will leave the docks and suspend, or they'll shut off. Grass fish will just move to another piece of the grass where they can still hunt. And so when you're fishing highly pressured grass places, just keep that in mind, like a Sleeters. If they're very deep, look shallow. Look for a little area that hasn't been disturbed, because that's where those fish will start congregating. But that's really the key to Sleeters in the summertime, is fishing that deep grass edge and go painfully slow with that bait. You're trying to mimic a bluegill. Now, the other thing you can do is you can throw a shaky head, a light shaky head, or a stick worm on the bedding fish. You can do that as well. And that's really the key to Sleeters in the summertime. It's not rocket science. It's just learning how to slow down and fish the clumps. It's that important. Questions and comments. Let's get through that there, because I got to get back to editing my Hidden Gems episode down the road too. Good morning, great video. Audio is good. Perfect. All right, awesome. Sweet. All right. Now, and that's what's kind of important too. Again, 12-pound fluorocarbon, 15-pound fluorocarbon, around there. Match the weight. Slow down. You're slowly creeping that thing through the water column. You're wanting it to bounce, pendulum, and float down, and you're working the pockets. And just try to imagine what a bluegill looks like in the water. A bluegill, I think, doesn't always flee. It'll flee every now and then, but a lot of times bluegill are stupid and they're not afraid of bass. And when they're deeper in the water column, they don't attend to scoot all the time. And then on the flip side, when they're shallower, so like the video I showed earlier, if you're throwing a half-ounce swim jig in 2 to 3 feet of water, you have to crank that speed so much faster, and it's going to leave the strike zone. If you go with a 1/4 or lighter swim jig, you can keep that thing just so slowly, just hovering in that thing, just nice and slow. And that gives that bass time to come over there and shark it. Because again, bluegill usually aren't going to just scoot. They're going to stay, they're going to chill, they're going to be floating around. And also, I think this is very, very important. Other bluegill will get very inquisitive of your bait. If you're making that thing go like a bat out of hell through there, you will get a couple of reaction strikes. But when you're able to make it go slow and just methodical like that, bigger bluegill will get aggressive and start biting at it. which I think also draws bass's attention to it. Just like the video I showed earlier where they start picking at it, they investigate it, it brings all the bluegill over, which makes the bass inquisitive. Bass gets inquisitive, it'll turn from a negative or neutral attitude to a feeding attitude real quick. That's all because you're matching the right pace, tempo, and weight of the bait. So, but anyway, guys, do you have any questions on this 4th of July? Did you use FFS? What does FFS mean? Oh, BFS? Do you mean BFS, Baitcaster Finesse System? I mean, I guess it's relative because, like, and I'm assuming you mean Baitcaster Finesse System. I don't even know why I have these on. I don't even know why I have these on actually because I don't know what stuff. Oh, so you can use forward. I mean, you could use forward-facing sonar. To answer your question, on my kayak, I do not have forward-facing sonar. No, on my boat, I do. I've fished this lake since I was 12. Like, I know every contour line and stuff, and I know when the grass is in there deep, I know what to do because it's such a. I feel very comfortable fishing grass lakes. It's go slow, cover water. You don't necessarily need forward-facing sonar for grass lakes. I mean, it helps. I'm not gonna say it doesn't help, but you don't necessarily need it because you can use your bait as a fish finder more or less, and you can start casting it out there. Yeah, I mean, this is my bigger one. This is a medium heavy extra fast tip rod. The other one I have too that you can use, at least with this one here, is a heavy action rod, a heavy rod with an extra fast tip. The extra fast tip I think is extremely important for a swim jig rod because you just want that sensitivity and that tip to be able to feel and pull that bait up and over stuff. Line wise, you could probably go a little bit heavier, a little bit lighter. I like to have a 12 pound and a 14 pound. It's not just because of the weight of the bait, honestly, but I will play around with it. Sometimes I'll flip flop and I will put the 1/4 ounce swim jig on the 14 pound test, and I'll put the 5/16 on a 12 pound test just to see if I can fiddle with the depth and how fast it moves, things like that. But it's basically almost like the same two rods, but with different line sizes, and I can flip flop a little bit too to kind of experiment to try to get it the right way. Because again, the heavier the line you have, the faster it's going to sink and it'll float a little bit more. And so you can fiddle around with that some too. I mean, I've even put a 1/4 on. I think it was like 18 pound test fluorocarbon at one point. I forget what tournament that was. I think it was fun fishing, but yeah, I put it on 18 pound fluorocarbon just to get the thing to just float a little bit more because we're dealing with lily pads and things. And when a swim jig to me, when it pops through and it just has that super slow fall, it looks so good and it plumes. And I think that's something that with the bluegill, when you have a swim jig, I think Matt Allen calls it like secondary action. But when you pop it and you see the stuff plume forward, it almost looks like a bluegill's fins coming up, like it's stopping, like it's freezing. And I think a lot of times that's what happens is the bass will be sharking or seeing it and it's swimming along and it freezes. And when it freezes, I think a bluegill freezing is the same thing as when a shad hits a dock post and then shoots off. The shad hits a dock post and shoots off because it knows it's being seen. I think a bluegill's reaction when it sees a bass a lot of times is it'll freeze almost like a deer. And when it freezes like that, it probably tells the bass that it knows that it's being watched. And I think that's what that pluming action on a swim jig that mimics a bluegill will do is when it plumes and it doesn't move very much, but almost like suspends for a split second, it freezes. It tells that bass like, oh shit, it knows I gotta go eat it real quick. It keeps it there. But again, this is like how I like to fish swim jigs a lot of times, that finesse setup. Because otherwise what you could do is you can go with a chatterbait or something like that if you're trying to get more of a reaction strike. And then there's times that you can go with a heavier one. I'm not saying you can't. You can do the more favorable reaction version of the swim jig. A 1/2 ounce, black and blue or just a white shad imitation. Cast it out there and just cream it back. John Cox has made a ton of money doing that. You can do that. I am just saying that if you're fishing more of a bluegill pattern on a clear lake, this finesse jig setup is pretty banging. And then the other thing that I used a lot of was a Zoom trick speed worm. I think it was pumpkin seed or green pumpkin. Either one works. Dye the tail yellow, 3/0 wide gap hook. You're gonna put a split. You're gonna put a weight in the front of that thing, and you're gonna peg the weight. Pegging the weight is super duper important. By pegging that weight, it's gonna keep it going together. Same thing as with the finesse swim jig. Match the weight. I cannot tell you. It's just depending on the grass, what lake you're fishing. Go lighter, like a 1/4. Again, 5/16 ounce. I really like that, but having those two available to you because you want it to go slow and just slowly reel it through there. The other thing that's really nice about that speed worm is you can fish it in thicker stuff than you can even a swim jig. And so I started the day throwing a lot of that trick worm. And when I started to get bit with that, that's where the lie was like, okay, they're probably going to hit the swim jig. And the difference is, you're going to get bigger bites with the swim jig than you are a worm, generally speaking. Not always. That I fish on spinning gear. I fish it on, I think it's like 20-pound braid to 15-pound fluorocarbon. And you're like, why such heavier stuff? It's just that way because I'm fishing a little bit heavier grass. I want to be able to like muscle them out and get them out of there with that old spinning reel setup. But yeah, anyway, guys, if you don't have any more questions, that is a live stream for today. Thanks again for watching. I appreciate it. Hope everyone has a wonderful 4th of July weekend. Again, just wanted to let you guys know a little thing. We have new episodes of Fishing the DMV that are going to drop on Friday. Tomorrow, this will be re-uploaded as a podcast episode. And then hopefully Thursday or next week, Hidden Gems, the next episode of Hidden Gems, Sleeters Lake will drop. And that'll get more in-depth to all that stuff. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comment section. Message me on Instagram or Facebook. I'll try to help you out. And I will see you guys next time on Fishing the DMV. Bye.